we have Angelo and Christophe Guillou from IBM, IBM Global Services. Angelo has 10 years of experience in the IT service industry and has been an estimation capability leader for 4 years within IBM GBS. Additionally, he has 14 years of experience in engineering and manufacturing across telecommunication and microelectronics. He is an electronics and telecommunication engineer and a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. Christophe Guillou comes from a computer science and telecommunication engineering background with over 11 years working as a software engineering professional and web technology specialist. He has been with IBM 7 years, mostly working as part of IBM Collaboration Solutions, R&D, as a technical leader, and 2 years within IBM GBS estimation. He spent 4 years consulting for financial services industries in the private sector. He is a certified PMP. And Angelo and Christophe have 5 years of experience with SLIM and estimation governance. So without further ado, I'll let them get started.
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. So I guess this presentation is a little different slant on estimation than I guess the use of SLIM. But what I find interesting was that the last two presenters actually prompted some thoughts as they were going through, and it kind of aligns to some of the material I will cover here. For instance, Dan explained to us how his initiation center of excellence fits within the project management center of excellence within his company, and as a response to a question, and Aaron was asked a question around whether the big rock sizing technique was ubiquitously used within his organization, and I think the answer was no, it was still within a smaller group. And then there was another comment or question around how do you get people off the concept of sizing in days and not in actual size of the project. So all these things kind of feed into the broader question, which is kind of a little bit away from the direct estimation process and more into how the organization matures its estimation practice, as well as its process, as well as its tools, but they're larger questions. So I'm just showing here the abstract that we submitted to QSM maybe a month or two back as to what we would talk about. And really, I guess, the perspective of this presentation is really around the additional challenges estimation and the estimation practice has as an organization scales up. So as it goes across geography, serves many markets, deals with people with various different skill levels and languages, the normal estimation challenges, they scale along with the organization. So there's obviously a number of things we can do. Anything we can do to standardize or to enable standards will help. But and obviously there's some things we can do that are better than others. So just to spend maybe a minute on the problem statement. So as large organizations scale, they go into various different markets, various different technology stacks, and really becomes a challenge to define and basically follow our own best practices. And estimation is no exception. It's not limited to estimation, but I mean, best practices in general are difficult once you kind of lose line of sight of the people who are actually going to implement them and leverage them. And this really becomes a big challenge, because what it does is we can develop the best practices, we can send them out and deploy them, but to actually get them used, to get the value from them, to get the information that they create back into the organization, that becomes very challenging. And if we can't do that, we never close the loop. We don't close the loop in the feedback, and thus we make it very, very challenging to enable a learning organization. So basically we're stuck with pockets of excellence in some parts and pockets of where more needs to be done in other parts. So really this presentation is a little bit about those challenges and some of the things you can do with tools. Now, tools isn't the only answer, but some of the tools that can be, or an approach to tools that can help support a greater level of maturity. So, as stated in the last slide, if we decompose the project, the organization or the enterprise into kind of three levels, and I mean there's different ways to decompose it. In this I've just talked about the enterprise level, the project level, and the practitioner level. Really we have a number of different challenges in implementing and deploying our estimation standards. So I guess at the enterprise level, the ones that myself and Christophe probably think most about is around data and collecting actual data to calibrate our estimation models. But I mean, that's by no means the only challenge. We're also very interested in compliance. So if we implement an estimation standard like, for instance, SLIMCollaborate or an Excel-based bottoms-up model, we want to make sure it's used when it should be used and not when it shouldn't, and that the latest versions are the ones that are used. And of course also then there's the area of coverage. For the various different offerings that we sell, have we got coverage for all our estimation coverage for all our offerings? We may have at a top-down level, but we may not have at a bottom-up level. So they're the kind of three enterprise things, and I guess the last one which I haven't called out there is some sort of estimation quality check. So say we go through the process of doing a top-down, bottoms-up, checking assumptions. There needs to be kind of an independent assessment of the overall health of the estimation process. Moving down to a project level, we have a number of challenges. One of the biggest is around awareness. So as a company scales from one or two locations to hundreds of locations around the world and thousands of different people involved in projects and project delivery, it becomes increasingly difficult to get the message out there and what those standards are and ensure that they're being used. I mean, there are plenty of tools and techniques to do it, but there's always some gap between what is defined at an enterprise level as the standard and what's understood at the practitioner level. Other issues obviously around model currency and calibration and model drift, and again at the project or process level then the time and accountability. So bigger projects will generally get support of an estimation expert, but smaller projects or change requests to existing projects may not, and less skilled people may be basically required to do an estimate and that, and be accountable to do so, but may not feel they have the skills to do so. And again, that feeds into the next level, at the practitioner level. The skills need to be maintained, training needs to be delivered, people need to have time to attend that training, they need to be aware of it, and they also need to be aware of the support that they should be able to leverage to help should they need it. So there are some of the typical challenges in deploying and adopting estimations. The deployment is almost the easy part. It's getting people to use it, i.e. the adoption. That's where, of course, we see the most challenges. Now, why does it matter? Well, obviously, we're talking to a group of people who are deeply interested in estimation, so it's almost an irrelevant question. But really, it matters because if we don't look at the estimation and the maturity of estimation within the organization, we're basically resigned to the fact that we're going to have to work everything out each time. We're going to have to reinvent the wheel each time. And sometimes we will do that well because we might have a very skillful individual who just happens to have a very good estimation tool, and other times we'll do it less well when the person doesn't know or the people don't know the actual project or the offering or the estimation technique. So it really matters because our past history of projects is a key asset to the company, and we really need to learn from that past. And where we'll see a lot of organizations focusing on the estimation process itself, it's the higher level governance of that. It's where you really ensure that at an enterprise level you capture your data. You'll often see in financial product disclaimers at the end of the ads after trying to sell you a financial product, they'll say something like past performance, no guarantee of future performance. Well, that might be true for financial products, but it's certainly not true for software delivery. if we have our past performance, it's a fairly good indication of our future performance. But as I said, it's very difficult in a complex organization that's been scaled to make those connections, collect that data, and ensure that the people who should be using the estimation models are aware of it and that they have them and they have all the best guidance and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about context. I kind of touched upon it earlier, that we have a large organization, scaled, people in various different countries, they're working on various different technologies, using various different languages. And as a result, even if we implement a standard today, it takes some time or to be implemented from implementation for people to be aware of it and then adopt it. So that's just, I guess, one of the additional challenges a larger company, multi-country company will have. Smaller companies won't have necessarily that challenge, they'll just have the normal estimation challenges. But so again, it's that diversity of location, people skills, offering, are we doing a package implementation, are we doing some integration project, are we doing a custom build, is it complex, is it not? It's all that diversity. We need standards that cover that whole gambit of issues, and it can be a real challenge. So as we, and myself and Christophe think, as we do regularly on these estimation things, because we're kind of part of the COE for estimation, we try to find solutions or solution directions that will make it easier to basically get the awareness up, be able to ensure that we can see when people are using the various estimation models, be able to roll out updates to those models in a centralized way. So again, I suppose part of solution direction is some sort of tool that allows us to abstract from the complexity that we live in, and also some sort of centralized control. If we and we do have plenty of Excel-based estimation models. We've also got the SLIM suite, but all of those estimations can potentially stay on the estimator's laptop or iPad. So really, the centralization piece is really, or the platform piece is really to try to get some of that information back into the enterprise level. So just switching gears, and still as I talk about the context, so obviously we've got a lot of complexity in our context, but there's also two other kind of views. One is around estimation as a process, and the other is around the estimation maturity, which I alluded to a minute ago. So I've laid out here a standard estimation process. I mean, there's nothing new or nothing that anybody should be shocked with on this page. But I guess the point I'm trying to say is quite often when people try to improve the lean, the estimation process, well, first of all, we must recognize it is a process and not an activity or a step, and that's the first mistake we often see. But even if we recognize that it's a process and not a step, and we know processes are made up of activities, connections, and flows, we can start working on improving this process. And that will yield some benefits, particularly at maybe a project level or a group of projects, portfolio level. But really, we need to go beyond that because there's other decompositions of the organization that need to be addressed to ensure that the process is used, it's uniform, and leverages the best assets we have. I will say one additional point, though, on the slide. So it has the usual piece like gather the inputs, establish your framework. This is more for complex kind of project delivery. Coordinate your component estimates, so that could be Excel-based templates, it could be a SLIMCollaborate trend line, it could be a SLIM suite one. Then we assemble the overall estimates, we move through the process to tailoring and so forth. What we generally do is, and the color triangle there, is we also would recommend as part of an improvement just the estimation process, an overall assessment. So some way of coming back and saying, okay, I've seen you've used the tools, I've seen you've got your non-functional requirements in there, your hardware costs, your software costs, your effort. But let's go back to basics. Is the basis of the estimation clear? Have all component estimates, are they reliable, are they within well-known confidence bounds? So some sort of questionnaire which actually looks at the process health of the estimation as separate from the actual individual templates or tools. And then if it passes, then okay, we may move on to an improved estimate, or we may go back to refining some inputs. But this is, again, is just one perspective. It's only the process piece. If we move to the next slide, you will see that, standards in general, you can have a maturity model, and estimation is no different. So typically, if you've ever seen any of these maturity models for standards, you would typically have maybe 4 or 5 levels. And this one, this one is based off a project management maturity model I used to use. You would typically highlight maybe 6 or 7 best practices within the area. So within estimation, it might be something around the sizing piece, the maturity of the tools, the maturity of the end-to-end calibration, and so forth. And what you would do then is you go and assess the estimation maturity. But again, you will get different levels depending on which organization dimension you're talking about. So if I decompose the organization into 3 pieces, in this case I've gone for 3 levels. Sometimes you'll see the portfolio level in there as well. So there's an organization piece, a process piece, or individual project piece if you want, and there's a people piece. My main focus is at the organization level. But even if I work hard, efficiently and diligently, and I'm successful, we can still have an overall low maturity if we can't get the process and the people up to a high level of maturity also. So in a case like that, for instance, we could have all the standards defined, we could have all the licenses purchased, we could have trend groups, calibration data, but if people are not aware of it or if they don't use it, then we don't get the benefit, and the maturity level of the overall enterprise is quite low. Obviously, and that's basically, I suppose, the point of this conversation, is that if we just think of estimation as a process and don't think of the larger organization context, then we're unlikely to really push the estimation maturity up to the highest levels that we want. And some tools, of course, are better for doing this than others. Okay, so again, before we go into the tool piece, I just thought, just to make sure, in case it hadn't been covered in any of the other conversations, that I would talk a little bit about the general approach. So in the services organization, and again, there'll be nothing new on this, on the service organization, basically there's a false division between the kind of the solution design and where all the estimation work, the true estimation work is done, and then there's a hard handoff, the client signs the proposal, and then the project team go and start delivering the project. Now that puts a lot more risk into your estimation process. If you're delivering the project within your own company, I mean, you'll have, first of all, a better access to data because you're not going through a proposal and response process. And you will probably have, even if you haven't got structured data that you've captured, you will certainly have a lot of anecdotal data from previous project performance. But in a service organization like IBM GBS, quite often we're in bid process, we get certain information from the client, we have to interpret that, and therefore our estimation techniques and processes need to be rock solid, because once we sign, we're committed, and it can be quite a challenging situation if you don't get it right. So typically we would advocate and use a top-down approach in conjunction, at least in the earlier phases, and then as more detailed as you move through the bid response cycle, you would want to be moving to a detailed estimate. And then, as I said, you would also need to have an estimation quality check as well, which looks at the process, make sure the process is followed, all the tools are in there, and so forth. And then once you sign, then you're more into planning estimation, the type of stuff you would see in the PEM book or the PM, body of knowledge, where, I mean, you're not fully estimating anymore. You're kind of estimating, but really what you're doing is you're planning out how you're going to assign the resources and budget to deliver the project. So I've talked quite a bit about the challenges to an organization, the additional challenges, I should say. Everybody's challenged with estimation, but they really scale as the organization's complexity scales, as the complexity of what the markets they sell to, and the geo-scope increases and so forth. Things become quite difficult. So to help improve the process and practice of estimation, we look to find something that allows us to abstract away from that complexity and to give us more centralization control over the estimation model. So even though there will always be a need for an Excel-based, bottoms-up, work breakdown structure model, that's fine, it's good. It's as many alternate approaches as we can use in estimation, the better. We still need some way of pulling back and making sure at a minimum we can see get a couple of viewpoints of each estimation. So with that in mind, then we kind of have thought, well, we'd like to get something that's web-based. You can access it through an enterprise or single sign-on. It should feed a back-end database, and we should be able to, in a centralized manner, see who's using it, potentially connect it up to other systems that would control the bid process and sales cycle, and basically be able to roll out changes and updates when they're available. Now, obviously, so that's what we would like in a tool that would help us improve our maturity. Obviously, we still want to maintain our complementary approaches, so we want to have a top-down parametric type, and indeed we want a bottoms-up web-based work breakdown structure type. We have developed the latter within IBM. It can be accessed to the web. It follows a work breakdown structure, has other things in it. It's very capable, very competent. And we've also then gone and used SLIMCollaborate for the top-down. So at that point, I'm going to stop sharing and shift over to Christophe, my colleague, who will bring us through our SLIMCollaborate journey.
So thanks, Angelo, for taking us through some aspects on estimation and the governance and the challenges that we have. I'm going to take you through now into the journey that we went through with SLIMCollaborate. I guess before we actually step into the journey itself, I'd like to do a brief recap of what we find as estimation models. So this is an illustration of what you may find in practice. I guess this is not the best of a kind type of estimation model, and certainly not what we would like practitioners to follow as an approach. Luckily in IBM, we come across a lot better practices, and usually estimation models are basically Excel-based, and they take in a notion of scope, obviously effort, the duration as output. And one of the challenges that we face with Excel models is we actually get to find countless of them, and obviously all of them comes with a degree of complexity that only the estimation model owner basically understands. So with that, moving to the next slide, what are the actual challenges that we see with estimation standards? So as briefly explained, we have a lot of standards as well as non-standard estimation Excel-based model. And the reality of this is estimation practitioners, particularly when they start to work with the bidding process and throughout the bidding process, trying to estimate, come up with top-down methods, they tend to actually roll back easily to Excel. So Excel is basically the main tool that's used by many practitioners who are not completely educated into the QSM and SLIM tooling. Obviously, when you have mainly Excel-based model, and as you actually come through a technological change, it's important to keep those models up to date, refreshed, and recalibrated, because otherwise they would simply deprecate as the technology grows and changes. Obviously, there's also a constant need to collect delivery feedback, so that has to be done, obviously, by connecting with the experts, and these experts can move into different roles, sometimes even different geos, and they obviously look into different offerings as they change. And all this actually causes a huge churn inside the estimation catalog that needs to be obviously kept to date, and we need to constantly deprecate some estimation standard as well as collecting the new estimation standards and promote them into an internal catalog. And obviously, because in IBM we measure compliance, and we try to make sure that we also have sufficient standards to cover the many offerings that we have. It's important that to understand that the KPIs changes constantly as well as estimation standard change. So what actually led us to adopt SLIMCollaborate in the first place? So obviously Angelo mentioned earlier that we're looking into an enterprise tool that could help us build some type of enterprise data warehouse, and where we could obviously store solution estimates as well as close out projects. So to make sure that we have a close feedback between solutioning and delivery. One of the key challenges that the company also faces the fact that users do not longer use Microsoft Windows as an operating system. We also use Mac, and a lot of our sellers and partners also usually meeting clients. So they're using iPads, they're using other mobile devices. So obviously cross-platform compatibility has become something pretty much necessary for a company like IBM. And so the other great thing that we found with Collaborate was the fact that you have an inbuilt workflow engine that could actually allow to not only create solution estimate but have recalibration those estimates, and also promote some offering trend groups to adapt to those technological changes. So the next slide actually shows the adoption roadmap that we actually followed. So for us, actually, we were presented an opportunity to help pilot the SLIMCollaborate, and so it all started back in Q4 2016. And obviously, we welcomed that opportunity to test SLIMCollaborate. So some of the few activities that we had to obviously come through as part of the initial pilot was to identify the right target audience, so that to make sure that we get meaningful feedback. And we also needed to understand how to configure the sandbox, also onboard the estimation practitioners and give them a number of coaching sessions so that they can basically get started with the tool. So after that, once we completed the pilot around Q1 2017, we obviously kept with SLIMCollaborate a number of interlocks to discuss what the feedback was from the estimation practitioners. Obviously, we collected voice of the customer, and we decided to prioritize a list of features. And I guess that the main goal that we were seeing in this and trying to understand what it is that we need to get things and people started with estimation using SLIMCollaborate was, what does it take us to get actually an MVP, so to speak, with SLIMCollaborate. And that was actually the plan, and that we came up with for Q2, and we decided to go with an approach using SLIMCollaborate as a service, as a production environment. And obviously, at this point, we had a lot more technical interlocks, and obviously architecture, product configuration, all this kind of discussion had to take place. So I'm going to briefly go through maybe a little bit more like what we did throughout those three major stages of our journey to SLIMCollaborate. So obviously during the pilot we had to onboard IBM estimation practitioners. Obviously they need to familiarize themselves with SLIMCollaborate. Myself and a colleague also had to receive some training to ensure that we could configure the back office and import all the QSM trends that we built throughout the years in IBM. We also wanted to make sure that the participants were receiving an incentive to take part to the pilot, so we ensured that they had some training certificates, and throughout the duration we ensured that they had also access to some of the internal points of contact within IBM throughout a number of clinics. And then after that, obviously, in January 2017, we managed to collect some feedback, and this was actually one-to-one interviews with some of the contributors to the pilot. Moving on, so the QSM and IBM interlocks, obviously it took a little bit of time and effort to collect the voice of the customer, and having a software development background myself, I was able to actually try to put together a list of product features development to enhance the product, but also looking at the bigger picture and also the non-functional requirements. So this slide gives really a good picture of the amount of effort that was put in to try to flesh out what could actually improve the product and make it more easily adoptable by the estimation practitioner. The MVP that we identified here is not really well represented, but we decided to keep it to the bare minimum to ensure that we could launch and get people started as soon as possible. So the item that we selected from this bigger picture is obviously the federated authentication, and we had actually some security standards that we leveraged to ensure that we could integrate QSM and IBM in a secure way. So that led us to Q2 2017, and we finally decided to get things moving as part of the SLIMCollaborate as a service MVP. So obviously, we before selecting the right options that we called as a service, SLIMCollaborate, we obviously did an evaluation on several deployment options, and some of the options that we felt were compelling did turn out to be maybe something that we would not want to follow, for the simple reason is that we actually like the idea of sharing some of the obviously anonymously some of the project feedback that we got within IBM with QSM to help us generate trend groups in the future. So we simply actually decided to go with the single sign-on route, and that would also make sure that there's a way for QSM in the future to leverage some of our historical data in generating new trend groups. So some of the use cases were identified early on, and they were actually not as straightforward as I was initially hoping. There's obviously a great level of integration between SLIMCollaborate and the organizational breakdown structure. And obviously that there was some aspects that I didn't know about that obviously took time to actually go through. But obviously the main challenge remained technical in this as a service approach, and we basically look at configuring some test environments and obviously testing using some security standards. So maybe some of you are familiar with something called SAML. That's what enables single sign-on. And after that, once we are happy with the testing in June, we decided to move on to the production prep environment and essentially install all the trend groups and any historical data that we have into our production environment. And after that, finally, we installed one of the key deliverables from QSM, which was an IBM SAML plugin. And we got up and running at the end of July after onboarding a number of practitioners that took part originally to the initial pilot, and by also communicating on training sessions that were going to be available to them as replay. So since we completed the pilot, there were a number of good things that happened, and I guess from the original pilot we had over 80 users that got onboarding onto the new platform. And as we actually go through the trend group generation process and also making sure that we have estimation models for every offering, we try to basically get any historical data back into the tool, and this helps actually creating more trend groups. And obviously we've been able to use SLIMCollaborate as a means to store closeout projects. And going forward, what we plan to do is every time we we actually implement a bottom-up estimation model or an Excel-based model, we want to be able to link this back into SLIMCollaborate as a using a top-down estimation approach and obviously a trend group. So some final words on estimation. I believe, working as an estimation expert, that there are many acceptable ways to deliver projects. And because there are different ways to deliver a project, different estimates are just perfectly acceptable. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions, and a seasonal trivia for anybody who's attending the call today. If anyone wants to have a go at this question, what's the weight of this giant pumpkin?
Okay, great. So first question I have is, do the projects do their own estimations, or do you provide the expertise and independence to the project teams? Or are the project teams expected to have / maintain estimation practitioners?
So the way it's structured is there's, as I alluded to earlier in the file, there's kind of a syntactic break along the life cycle. So there's a piece where we solution and bid for work, and then there's a piece where we would deliver. So in the piece where we solution and bid, there's a certain group of people who would be involved in estimation. Now, it wouldn't be my team. My team are really, we work at the organization level, making sure that there's coverage of estimation models, that there's licenses for collaborating for SLIM, and we work with the various different technology groups within IBM to ensure that their estimation models are good. When it comes to actual this bid sales and project delivery cycle, that comes down to different, that's the process piece, and you can have either the same group who run the full end of that process depending on the particular market we're selling to, or you can have two different groups. So we would set the standards and help the technology tower set the standards, but other people who are specialized would actually do the estimates. But again, if a project is very small, they may not get a specialist, and that's why it's it can be very challenging, and you really need to make sure that you can get the standards out there, people are aware of them, and if they need help, that they can have a means to put the hand up to get that help.
This might have been covered. This was a question we got earlier in the presentation. It was, what about risk contingency? And let me know if this has been covered already.
So we separate that out. So obviously the first piece we're trying to understand is what are the direct costs to develop the estimate. And obviously effort is one of those components, to maybe a hardware component, the software, maybe a travel component. Then the project, of course, would have to be assessed anyway for risk, and then that would lead into contingency. But that's kind of more, we're getting into the pricing then. So when we're talking about estimate, we're really trying to just break down those three direct costs to the project: the software, the hardware, and the effort, the development efforts of people. There's a separate process to look at risk, and then to add on contingency, which is as part of the pricing process.
Who is responsible for assigning access to SLIMCollaborate, and how are those users determined?
So either myself or Christophe do that. People put their hand up through a Slack channel if they want it, and then we just ask them business justification, just so when we come to look for money to repurchase the license, we have the justifications, and then we give them access. I hope that question was from an IBMer.
Early in the presentation, you spoke about collecting actuals from completed projects. Mm-hmm. Do you require that all your projects collect the specified actuals, or is there some type of threshold and or sampling approach used?
So best practice would say all projects, as part of their lessons learned, should collect their actuals and the actual effort and the actual scope delivered. However, that doesn't usually happen. So what we would do is we would sample the organization. along certain lines, a certain contract value size would be one of the parameters, and maybe a certain scope size. And we've been, had some success. There's a lot more needs to be done in that area. So we generally, I think QSM are fully aware of how many projects we've collected because we share them with them. But it is a real piece of heavy lifting. There's no easy way to collect project actuals. Even with the levels of automation we might have, collecting effort hours is easy, but connecting that back to scope is where it's challenging. Typically, it's done through a structured interview.
Has the ability to use SLIM on mobile devices increased adoption?
I don't know if we can answer that. I don't know if we've got the metrics on that.
I try to take the question. I've seen it working on mobile. Now again, it's always a bit of a challenge because the way the web development as well changes. There's always new frameworks to actually get things working on different platforms. And I guess actually SLIMCollaborate is still at the very start. But I've seen it working. And now I can't really guarantee that it's actually driving adoption. But I think it's a necessity because obviously, people do change platforms, and will be probably becoming even more a thing in the next coming years to work on tablets as opposed to laptops and things like that. So that's my take on that.
I think just that, so we haven't actually gone out and specifically asked people, are you using it because you want to use it through an Apple or a mobile device? But what we did get previously was, I can't use standalone SLIM because I've now got an Apple. So he said, okay, well then here, use Collaborate instead. So anecdotally, we know people have tried to use the standalone product, and when they couldn't, they then reached out to us, which is actually what they should do, and we would have enabled them with a license.
During RFP stages, what are normally the basis of estimates being followed?
Well, we would typically have it. So we have a catalog of estimation models to match different offering types or different markets or technology stacks. And then we've got some top-down ones like Collaborate and SLIM, which are basically for use, which are abstracted. They can take in various different sizing factors and therefore should be usable across the full technology spectrum. So it's really using those predefined Excel models, and in most cases people have them. Sometimes it will be people rolling their own, and sometimes they can be quite good if it's a team delivering in an account that's going on for years. They know the client, they know the pretty good understanding of the environment. But if it's a kind of once-off or it's a project that we haven't got a lot of time to engage in before, then they should be using one of the standard models that we put out there along with a complementary technique like top-down from SLIM, and then running it through an overall assessment at the end.
How do you sample the projects after the fact to get the actuals? It seems as though they may not have them. Do you somehow...
No, they'll always have the actuals. I mean, they have to. I mean, it's just the way a large enterprise works. You do collect actual hours, so you know what people are doing. It's like any service delivery organization. People will log their time to the work that they're doing. So the actual hours is the easy piece. It's trying to understand the delivered scope is the challenge. And we would normally go back in with the estimation model and say, okay, tell me, what did you actually deliver in terms of size and factors? Now, if it's a package type implementation, it's actually, straightforward enough because project managers keenly understand RISES and process scope. If it's custom build, it can become more of a challenge because the size and factors are generally more understood by a technical community than the project manager. But ultimately that's how we do it. We go back, we can easily in a centralized way access their hours. It's the scope we need to go back to the project team with.
Are parametric estimates used at the project initiation stages?
I think by the time at initiation, so in that case we've sold the project and we're now working on it, you're more likely to be using a bottoms-up estimator at that stage.
Are you using SLIM to estimate both software development, enhancement, and other types of work? If so, can you speak a bit to the types of work you are using SLIM to estimate with?
So it will be used in basically package type delivery and custom build software development. I'm not sure what other type is, but certainly it's used in, particularly in the early part. So if we're talking specifically about SLIM, it will certainly be used in the early part of that bid process. And it can be either custom build, complex custom build, or package type.
We've also applied, and to what you just said, we successfully applied this to agile type of project, the design thinking, and also I think we have an awareness that QSM is being also used for infrastructure projects. In fact, there's a QSM plan available for this, so you can apply the Putnam equation to many different, many different type of projects, obviously.
What would be the most important piece of advice you would give to a company trying to stand up a global estimation function? What resistance have you encountered and how did you overcome it?
Oh, I heard once the best type. Somebody was asked for advice and they said the only advice I give is I don't give advice, not to give advice. But I'd say from a resistance perspective, it's probably not resistance, it's more awareness and lack of understanding is a big problem. Everybody has an intuitive feel for estimates, but their intuitive feel is generally wrong because they think of things in terms of time or cost as opposed to size. So quite often the conversation, you start out talking about estimation, and this is senior leaders who you're going to look for to basically sponsor a COE. You might start off talking about estimation, and within a minute they're talking about duration or dollars. Right? And you say, no, I'm talking about size. So it's difficult to make the case. Advice is, I think, it depends on the size of the organization. If the organization is large enough and spans enough geographies and time zones, then it does have to have some sort of COE, Centre of Excellence, or to kind of try to work at that organization level and implement standards and best practices. And also means that, for instance, if you purchase a tool, you're not going to the same suppliers through various different means. You buy a corporate license and you manage it that way. But I mean, making the case and getting the interests of of executives can be quite a challenge. Everybody kind of knows it's a difficult area and it's a bit of a problem, but it's hard to get people excited to tackle it.
Do any of the estimated projects use client personnel for development, or is the project staffed just with IBMers? I.e., does the PI or other project characteristics change if the client is quote-unquote helping?
So what I can say is certainly clients are can be part of the delivery teams. I don't know, like from the internal bottom-up model, we certainly do include them, but we don't necessarily, we include them and account for them in a different way than, say, the PI would be done in QSM. I'm not sure I've seen an example of somebody modifying the PI based on people external to the organization being involved. Now, that could very well happen. I just haven't been exposed to it.
Did I understand you correctly that you can link in your bottom-up estimates into your SLIMCollaborate estimate?
That's the next step. So we have a platformed bottom-up estimation technique, and we have Collaborate. Now we're trying to figure out the technical integration between the two. There's a cheap and cheerful way of doing that, and there's a more technical way of doing that. We haven't quite decided which we're going to try. But ultimately, we would ask that teams going through this sales and solution cycle, non-delivery, that they use both and more. Actually, sometimes you'll see teams using three approaches.
I think that's all of the questions we have for this presentation.
So how much my pumpkin weighs?
Oh, I saw two
question.
guesses. Let's see which were they. I saw 500 pounds and 326 pounds.
Okay. So let's say close enough, 1,700 pounds.
Wow. We grossly underestimated. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great presentation. Once again, we had a wonderful Q&A session, a lot of great questions. If anybody comes up with any questions after the fact, you can email info@QSM, and we will direct them to Christophe and Angelo, or if we can answer them for you, we'll answer them too.